decide on applications for home occupation permits, special use permits, exceptions, and variances to the zoning ordinance, applications for conditional use permits in the floodplain, requests for reasonable accommodation because of a handicap, and appeals of the decision of the zoning enforcement officer. As a board of the city, we welcome all testimony. We make our decisions based on the facts and evidence as allowed under city code and presented in open meeting. Testimony before the board must be given under oath or affirmation. If the proceedings become lengthy, we may ask the testimony to be focused on new facts or evidence not already presented. We ask that you come to the microphone, this microphone, if you wish to speak, so that your testimony will be audible and may be recorded. Before speaking, please complete an orange information card at the table right over there, and hand it to the recording secretary, Jackie, who's at the computer facing towards us. When you are testifying, please address your remarks to the board. We also ask that proceedings be orderly. The Zoning Board of Adjustment is an independent volunteer board of citizens. We are not part of the city administration. We are served in our efforts by Jane Chang, Assistant City Attorney. Our planner tonight is Eloise Schallstrom. Did I get it right?
Close enough.
And our recording secretary is Jackie Higgins. The order of proceedings for each application will be as follows. First, an oral statement summarizing the issues and procedural steps will be presented by the staff. Second, testimony and evidence will be presented by the applicant. Third, testimony may be heard from any members of the audience who wish to speak in support of or opposition to the appeal. Next, the board will give the applicant and city staff an opportunity to present concluding summaries and arguments. And finally, the board will discuss the issues and evidence and come to a decision. Okay, so the first order of business on the agenda tonight is election of officers. Do we have any nominations?
I would like to nominate Ms. Ms. Schoeneman as chair. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Second.
Can I get a vote, please?
Yes. Aye.
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 Okay, and then vice chair as well. Do I hear any nominations?
I'd like to nominate Mr. Bowers.
I'll second.
I guess I say aye.
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 Okay. The second item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the meeting on March 13th, 2019. Are there any corrections to the minutes?
I don't see any corrections. I move to approve the minutes.
Okay,
Second.
great. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign.
Abstain.
Okay. So the minutes of March 13th, 2019 pass. 3. Okay. Next on the agenda is a request for the special use permit to allow enlargement of a non-conforming use in the RH Residential High Density Zoning District. Eloise.
Good evening. My name's Eloise Schallstrom. For those that are new on the board, nice to meet you. I'm with staff and I'm here to present 2 items to you tonight. The first is a request for a special use permit to allow enlargement of a non-conforming use in the RH district, as was mentioned already. And what does that mean? I'm going to jump to the section on page 4 that talks about nonconformities. So what that means, and then I'll go more specifically into this particular agenda item. A nonconformity exists when a property was permitted, and at the time it was permitted, it was permissible under the zoning code. This particular property started at this site in 1978, and it was permitted as commercial use at that time as a theater. Since that time, the zoning code changed and the land use changed. And as things happen over time, things change. And and the direction that the city determined that was appropriate for this area was residential. And so the existing zoning became residential high density. And that is also reflected on the future land use map and the land use policy plan of the city. This particular property, so back to non-conforming uses. The city recognizes that this happens over time sometimes. And so given that it's a non-conforming use, the city has certain standards in place. I mean that they have to go out of existence, but there's limitations on how they can continue into the future if they wish to expand either the building, if the building's non-conforming, or the use, if the use is non-conforming. In this case, the building is non-conforming for the rear setback, so they can't extend that non-conformity, but they can extend the building where it would not impact the rear setback. And that's what they're doing, is they're proposing to extend to the north where they have ample room, and the code will allow that. An expansion of use within the code is limited to 125% as the maximum that they can expand. And they are right under that number. So the code places reasonable limits on expansion of nonconformities. Secondly, a non-conforming use, even though it may be enlarged to 125%, it is not allowed to increase in intensity of operations. So we're going to talk a little bit further about that through the discussion tonight, and that will be a really important thing for you to determine if their intensity of operations is being expanded or not. So to walk you through the agenda item. Okay. Just need to zoom out. So there's two screens. They're the same. So you can look at the one that works best for you wherever you sit. So this is a view of the area looking from the north. Lincoln Way is at the bottom of the picture. And you can see that there is some higher density residential uses toward you at the bottom of the picture. And then as you move up to the top of the picture, there are residential low density uses, and there's more trees and smaller houses and less pavement and so forth. So this particular site is really at that transition point. It is within the RH zoning, but it's immediately adjacent on the south to residential low density uses. So this picture is looking at the same, looking at the site, but in this case, it's coming from the east down Todd Drive. And as you come down Todd Drive, you're looking directly at the theater structure. And so to the right would be the neighborhood, the low density neighborhood. And to the left is the higher density residential, including apartments and so forth. And this picture shows you the front of the building in the winter, showing how the building currently looks today. It's a metal structure that looks rather industrial. And so one of their goals is to improve the facade of this structure and to make it look more like a theater use. Secondly, as you approach this site, I'll go back to this picture. Oh, maybe, I'm not sure if it's easier to see or not. But as you approach this site, you come in at this intersection of Todd and Abraham, and you head east, and the site is constrained. There's existing pavement and parking in that area. And primarily what they're looking to do is to expand the parking lot toward the rear of the site and to the south side of the site. And they're trying not to do too much changes to this part that's already existing. We'll get into that a little bit further as well. This Actors has been located at this address, 120 Abraham Drive, since 1970. Initially, the zoning was GC, which was general commercial, and the code was revised in 2000. When the code is revised like that, the idea is that there's a vision, a long-term, a long view vision for the city as to how the city might transition over time. So it was anticipated that this was an appropriate area for higher density residential. And so that was why that all changed. The building expansion, the current building is 80 feet by 80 feet with a first floor area of 6,400 square feet and a second floor area that's primarily for storage of 2,689 square feet, totaling 9,089 square feet. So they can increase by 125%, which means no more than 2,272.25 square feet. And their expansion is 2,271 square feet. So they are just under the limitation. That limitation allows them to get a special use permit and come before you tonight. That's one of the big clinchers. The second big clincher, as I would say, is capacity. And they have indicated that their current seating capacity is 136 and that their expansion is basically including more foyer area and entryway and so forth. They are not proposing to change the seating area at all. And so the seating capacity will remain at 136. An expansion to the building can only be allowed if it does not increase the nonconformity, meaning the building can only expand in the direction where the building meets the required setback. And they are doing that. But the question of capacity, there is seating capacity, but capacity can also be related to how often it is used, the hours of operation and so forth. We'll get into that a little bit as we go through the conditions. Currently, there is a sidewalk along part of Abraham and right in front of their site. And we have required them to extend a sidewalk into the site, into the front, to the front door, which is one of our code requirements. Parking is calculated at one space per 5 seats for a total required parking of 28, which is really a rather low number for this kind of use. And so, of course, they want to have much more than 28. And they are expanding their site to make their site more usable as far as better circulation, safer circulation, ease in parking, and so forth. And so right now, they do tend to overpark the area that they have, and then some of their clientele tend to park on the street or wherever, but it feels unsafe to some of their, it's my understanding it feels unsafe to their clientele as it currently exists because it doesn't flow very well to be able to maneuver in and out safely. So their proposed parking will meet the city standards for aisle width and for parking depth and circulation. Lighting, they do have existing parking lot lighting that's provided by the city on the existing utility poles. I think that in the staff report, we've indicated that the parking lot lighting would be a new introduction. It will not be a new introduction. It actually, there is some lighting there now. It doesn't serve their needs particularly well because it's limited in where it is. The new lighting will meet our code for outdoor lighting code as far as parking lot lighting, which means that we've also required them to provide us with photometrics showing that the light is cut off and will not trespass beyond the property line. And the proposed parking lot lighting is on 20-foot poles. So that is a height that should not provide glare to neighboring properties. Additionally to the parking lot lighting, they're proposing to light the building itself. One thing they're wanting to do is include 4 lights that would shine down on the building, but then at the times when they do have a temporary banner hung on the building to advertise certain productions that they have on at that point in time, that lighting would light the banner, the temporary banner signage. They are in addition looking to include some accent lighting with LED, what's called neon flex lighting. It's a strip lighting that they would propose in red and blue to highlight both the building facade and what is proposed as a new building marquee. Although this type of lighting is generally permissible in commercial areas, as a residentially zoned area, the special use permit allows for scrutiny of lighting to be compatible with residential surroundings. So we do have some concern as to whether this would be impactful to the neighboring property, particularly to the west there on Abraham. And but in talking with the applicant, it was stated by them that they limit that given their existing performance schedule and activities, that it would be illuminated only 40 nights a year, which would include show evenings, dress rehearsals, season announcement, and donor appreciation evenings. That's important, and I'm going to come back to it. They also stated that lights would be turned off by 10:30 p.m. Landscaping, they are meeting the landscaping for what is required for the new parking lot area, which is I'm gonna put it on the screen just so I can refer to it. Sorry. So the new landscaping they're proposing is in this area on the perimeter of the new parking area. And so those trees are required, and they are including as well a privacy fence along there as well, which will greatly diminish impacts to neighboring properties and be an improvement for their site as well. The existing property on this side has some high shrubs already on their property, and there's quite a constraint on area to this side as well as to this side. And there was concern that if material was planted in that area, or if the parking lot were to be required to be expanded all the way to the property line, which the code actually requires at least 3 feet unless an exception is granted. We just had concerns that it would impact the existing shrubbery that's there that's acting as a screen today. And because they're not looking to change this parking lot out here as far as the pavement area, they're only looking to change the striping to bring it into compliance with the code. We have asked As I'm sure you saw in the packet, we have asked for front yard landscaping, and where we're discussing that is in this area here as you come immediately into the site. And I'll get into that a little bit more as we go through the conditions. So as part of the nonconformity, the code says that it's appropriate to place reasonable limitations on the expansion of nonconformities, and with the idea being that to make sure that there's no adverse effect to surrounding properties and the community as a whole. So additionally, as I mentioned, that any increase in intensity of operations would not be permitted under this expansion. And we did not believe that there was any increase of operations. The applicant had previously stated that operations would carry on as they have in the past, that the use would be consistent with its current use, and that the hours of operation will continue as they have. In some discussions today with the applicant, there was some discussion that they were not supportive of the conditions listed by staff as part of the approval, particularly the 40 nights. They felt that that would be problematic for them and for their ability to expand. So when they speak, one of the things that you will want to make sure that they clarify is how they currently use their site and how they intend to use it in the future. So I'm going to jump now to page 8, where we go through the standards. I mentioned the land use policy already, that it shows it as high density residential. And of course, as a non-conforming use, that's understandable that they're not residential and that they're not looking to conform in that way, but that they are hoping to fit within the area as an acceptable expansion. Number 2, the requirement is that the use will not change the central character of the area. And at that point, we stated that seating capacity was not expanding. And we also stated that the front yard landscaping, even though it's a existing nonconformity, that there's an opportunity perhaps to add some additional front yard landscaping that would minimize the fact that there's no front yard landscaping along there at all. Under number 3, not be hazardous or disturbing, the conclusion stated was that there was no increase in intensity of use. However, with the discussion today, if in fact that they are looking to expand their hours beyond a limited number of nights per week, if they do not want any restriction on the nights that they are able to offer production, staff would consider that an increase in the intensity of use. So staff believes some restriction on the number of nights is appropriate. On page 10, under findings of fact, item number 6, we state that the operations will carry on as they have in the past, which was stated by the consultant. And there again, we would want to make sure that is consistent with the past. And our concern with the lighting on the building, as it's stated there, is that this type of lighting is a new introduction that's not typical of a residential type area. And so the lighting on the building has been proposed to be not particularly, it does meet what we have as the outdoor lighting code, which requires less than 1,800 lumens but staff still felt there was some concern about the lighting to make sure it was appropriate, even though it was atypical of a residential area. So that was part of the reason the 49ths came into play, because the applicant had indicated that the lighting would only be illuminated during those times. So if there's no restriction on how many nights, then it's potential that every night the lighting could be on, even though I don't think in reality it would, but there needs to be a limitation. On page 11, under the residential zone standards, not create excessively higher levels of traffic if the capacity of use were to be changing, or if it was a substantial increase, then potential traffic would also be increasing over what has been the historic pattern for the last 40 years. Page 12, not have noticeably different and disruptive hours of operation. When we wrote this, we were on board with the idea that they were continuing as they have, and that they would not be disruptive or changing, and particularly by minimizing by including as a condition the fact that they would not be operating more than 40 nights a year and turning off the lighting by 10:30. We felt that that was continuing to be an appropriate level of activity and not different from what was historically the case. On page 13, item 6, the expansion is limited to no more than 272.25 square feet, and their proposed addition is just under that. It's 2,271. So they do meet that criteria. So staff recommended in our conclusions, we believe that based on findings of fact, that the use as requested did meet the criteria of the code, but that there were some conditions that should be included in order for them to be granted the special use permit to expand. And those conditions, as we stated on page 14, are that that the lighting would be illuminated no more than 40 nights a year and turned off by 10:30, and that that other note is indicating that lighting will be subject to the design performance standards of the zoning ordinance, regardless of the allowance to have lighting. That just means if there's some problem as it's installed with glare or light trespass that is not, that would have to be dealt with, is what that's really meaning. B, evening performances and events would be limited to 40 days in a calendar year, and that a front yard landscape planter would be included on the south side of the entrance with 1 overstory tree and 7 low shrubs to comply at least in part with the front yard landscaping requirement. I will comment on that in looking at the plans further, if you look at this plan, there is a water line that cuts through there, and this is a power pole, and there's a power pole over here with an electric line that goes between those 2 power poles. So having an overstory tree in what is shown as that first parking space really would not be appropriate. They could do an understory tree, or they could do no tree and increase the number of shrubs. What staff was really getting to with this recommendation was that we felt that some front yard landscaping was appropriate to move it toward having something rather than nothing there along the street, because the current code does require front yard landscaping. And there is a criteria under the non-conforming part of the code that they be brought up to conformity as much as possible. And so that is our recommendation. We do ask that when you hear from staff that they define their use and that they better define what their use is currently. They also did state that they have, just a second. They stated today that they also host other arts organizations over the years and that the suggested restriction would prevent them from supporting other organizations. That was new information to us. We didn't know that they had other organizations that they host. It would be good if they could talk a little bit further about how that is part of their operations. And with that, I'm going to conclude and let you hear from others.
Okay, thank you, Eloise. Board, are there any questions for staff at this time?
No, right now.
I have one.
Okay.
How many parking spaces currently are there? Are they increasing the number of spaces?
Yes,
Okay,
I believe so. But I will let the applicants
okay,
to that.
thank you. Okay, so now it's time for the applicant to speak to their request. Hello.
Hi, I'm Mike Jackson. I am president of the board of directors.
Okay,
Oh, my car
Yeah.
is my goodness.
and if you could, to Jackie, please, state your address and then I'll swear you in.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Jackson, 5615 Thunder Road, Ames, Iowa.
And do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Eloise, you did a great job explaining it. It's been a long journey to get here. We, as Eloise stated, the actors facility has been in place for over 40 years. It was originally complying at the time it was constructed. We are a nonprofit, all-volunteer organization. Have been in existence for 63 years, and we put on plays. We're kind of a laid-back type of business, but we are a business. And so what we're trying to do with this is we own this facility, and compared to a lot of volunteer community theaters around the state and around the country, that is kind of an unusual thing. There's a lot of people who contributed to that in the past, and it's one of the real assets that we have. We've made some efforts in recent years to do remodeling to the interior of the building to provide a better experience to our patrons, and this is in part doing just that. The seating of 136 seats is part of what we think makes our theater really good. We have no intent to ever change that. It's small black box theater. It is a good experience when we put on a good play. And so our intention is to always keep that as far as the intensity of the facility for each performance. The couple of things, and we've met all the specific requirements of the code and of the zoning code and things like that. The recommendations we would speak to, there was some misunderstanding. We were asked originally, how many nights do we have activities going on? And we clarified the difference between rehearsals versus actual performances where you have a lot of people come. Presently, it's about 40 nights a year. 5 years ago, we every show, we put on 5 plays a year. Every show ran 3 weekends, 9 performances in total, and we were occupying the place about 50 nights a year. And this is a restriction. As I said, we are a business, albeit nonprofit, albeit all volunteer. Our goal is to put on really high quality performances and attract as many people as possible. We adjust the performances based on what we think we can fill the house with. And so we are reluctant to agree to a limit of 40 performances because that is just too strict of a limitation on that facility. The lighting issue, the requirement for the lighting to be out by 10:30 at night. The fact is, we don't have a curfew at Actors. And typically, and while we did say typically we are done by 10:30 at night, not always. And the lighting in the parking lot is a public safety issue. We don't say open to midnight. We don't do things real late. We're not a bar. We're not anything like that. But the fact is if we're going to be in strict compliance, 10:30 would be something that from time to time we would probably surpass. And so we're concerned about that because we want to make sure that our facility is safe for the people who put on plays, who work behind the scenes, and for our patrons who come to performances there. So we're very concerned about that restriction as well. We think the lighting is an important part. In fact, we worked to add 2 lights in the parking lot that weren't required strictly for the public safety aspect of it. Thirdly, the other requirement for the over now understory tree and the shrubs. If you're out of that facility, you're going to go, I'm not sure that would bring value to it. In the grand scheme of things, I don't think we have we had no improvements in that area. So we were surprised when that came across as a recommendation. This is not something that I don't think we're hugely supportive of it, but it's not the end of the world if we end up having to do that. And so that one probably is fine. But the other 2 recommendations were certainly something that we think is troublesome. We've been in this location, as I said, for over 40 years, and we work very hard to be good neighbors. To date, I don't believe there is one complaint about Actors as far as from our neighbors. In fact, the house that's cited as the biggest impact, which is just to the west of the facility and south of the driveway, is owned by Steve Vogelzang. And I just talked to Steve last week. He called me up and asked, we're going to work together to trim the shrubs that are on his property, but he asked if we'd be willing to help. And I said, sure. And so I showed him the plans, and he had noticed the sign there. And his response was, no, Actors doesn't bother me at all. I think it's a good facility to have. And the performances don't cause him any difficulty or concern. Now, I will say Steve is the owner and has owned this property for a while. He has been up until just recently a non-resident. It was a rental property. So he's moved there in the last few months. But he's been there in that vicinity for a long time, and he has no objections to what we were doing. We have not specifically talked to other property owners, but as I said, to date, we're unaware that there have been any complaints. We've worked with the apartment complex to the north. When they were having some work done, we pulled down our cable and pulled a post out so their tenants could access it. The storage building that's on the north side, closer to Abraham Drive, when they needed to have access to that, we also removed our fence and allowed them to have access there. We replaced a retaining wall for the property just to the south of Mr. Vander Vogelzag's property. And it was on the property line, but it was out of their sight. They didn't care. We replaced that, and we did it at our cost. So we have worked hard over the years to be good neighbors to that. And if there were complaints, I could understand the concern about this. But keep in mind, for 40 years, we've had no restrictions on how often we use this facility, and there have not been complaints. So with that, we would like consideration for not having these restrictions put on us. In fact, probably if those restrictions are made to as part of the requirements, I'm not sure that we would proceed with the addition. The addition itself is to make it a more comfortable and a safer experience for our patrons. If you've been to a play there, our boardroom, our gathering room is small. and so it's crowded. And our clientele tends to be not really young, at least not the majority of them. And so this allows a little bit more room for people to move around to get to the seats. It will add no more people to sitting in the house, but we think it just makes it a better and safer experience for our patrons. So with that, I've rambled on long enough.
Does the board have any questions for the applicant?
I have one. Eloise mentioned other organizations you work with. Can you go through that?
Actually, Stan, if you would come up and because I don't remember specifically, we've worked with a number of other arts organizations. Children's Theater has used it in the past, but not the last couple of years. Recently, you have to
My name is Stanley Rapey. I live at 219 Wildflower Drive in Ames. And what
do you
else?
Swear to tell the truth?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I knew there was something else. Okay. And, over the years, Actors has hosted a lot of other organizations. I would tell you it's been less in the last couple of years because we are so cramped for space, and hence the addition. But we've had Ames Choral Society has done their cabaret in our building. We've had the Arts Council has had an event in our building. We had Amos. They're the housing people. They brought in a show and they did it on our stage and they sold the tickets, but we just played host for them. When Story Theater Company first when they were developing it, we actually coached them a little bit and they performed in our building. We've had children's theater. And kind of a fun thing is when Eric Snyder was the public relations police officer, he was doing some of his public relations videos in our building. And so it's a wide variety of things. Now on Fridays, we have Story County Volunteer Center coming in to do a class in the morning, Friday mornings. So we coordinate with as many organizations as we can possibly accommodate.
And until a couple of years ago, public elections were held there. That was one of the election sites. But it's a little too small.
Now it's too small. What else?
Do you have another question?
Yep, I do.
Great.
Parking spaces. What were you originally at and what are you moving up to?
Do I don't know the original count. We could probably, if you have the drawing, we could. We just rearranged what we had.
So it's
Quite honestly, what happened is the parking spaces that are painted now are not consistent with what the city would allow. And what happens is that whatever was permitted way back then, the people who were involved and were aware of that at the time weren't around when they came in to paint the parking spaces again. And the lines were worn off. And so the painter painted what made sense and put a couple. So that's what happens. In fact, the concern about the limited 40 nights, even if we thought we could agree to that, is okay. 10 years from now, Stan and I are not around the board anymore. And the people who are in charge won't have any recollection of that. And we don't want to agree to something that we think won't be complied with or that is not in our best interest to be complied with. So,
And we're fully aware that just like the zoning change for the area, the world changes over time. And so to agree to something that we don't know, how it will work in the future. And it's certainly 40 nights is certainly appropriate now, but we can't say that 5-10 years from now.
to give an idea, last year, we added an additional performance for each of our plays. So we were doing 5 performances for 4 of the plays and then 8, and we added an additional performance because we were having that demand. And so it's changed just in the last couple of years, and we think that's a sign of success in what we're trying to do. And in this day and age, for an all-volunteer community theater with the competition from that exists, whether it's Iowa State or whether it's other theatrical organizations, it's hard to say what our needs are.
So what number less than 365 would you go with then? What would be agreeable? Mm-hmm. Somewhere between 40 and 365.
This is arbitrary as well as the 40, 180.
108?
Yeah,
Okay.
180, 180.
Oh, 180.
Yeah.
And the issue is we talk about performances, but parking lot lights, would probably be turned on in the wintertime.
See, we have rehearsals.
And
every-
And
4 nights a
so,
week.
so if you're going to rehearse, and all of our people are volunteers, which means they have jobs
Mhm.
during the day. So parking lot lights, for the safety of people, would be on at night for rehearsals, because for obvious reasons. So then it gets down to definitions. And I know we've talked about performances because of the lights on the side of the building, but we don't want to create any kind of we don't want to mislead anyone in terms of, if it's dark out, for the safety of people in the cast, we'll probably turn on the parking lot light so they can get in the car, and the last person goes to their car in the dark. Because because with the new parking scheme, parking will be down around the side of the building, not directly in front.
Mhm.
And so, that changes things a little.
I just wanted to give clarification. Our criteria was not asking that the parking lights be turned off or be on only 40 nights a year, because we know sometimes you have rehearsals and so forth. It was the building accent lights and building lights that we were limiting to
Yeah.
those performance nights.
And those are well within code. So we're just concerned that we might be obliging the future into something people don't know.
And today we don't have restrictions.
So I think you're not allowed to increase the intensity of the use. And we need to come up with a concrete number of what the typical current use is, so that we can condition the permit, so that we are ensuring that you're not increasing the intensity, which would not be permitted under the current code. So do you have a concrete number?
We've changed the intensity. If you describe the intensity increase as being if we put on more performances, we 10 years ago, we were putting on more performances. So
what was that number? What's the
it was
performances,
probably
rehearsals?
55 or 60 nights a year. And we weren't having a lot of attendance because our quality of our performances weren't very good. So we lessened that, and we worked on building the quality back in, and now we're building it back up. The fact is, we're going to put on 5 plays a year. The facility can't support more than that.
Okay.
And at most, we'll have 3 weekends of performances or 9 performances. So that's 45, and then a handful of other events, so 50, 55. But the fact is what business would limit what they do? And I understand with getting this permit to have a non-complying, a special addition to a non-complying facility, that would be something that would be considered. But if we wouldn't have approached with this application, we would just be going on a merry way.
I also would like to just point out the fact that it isn't like we're a retail business. We're a community organization. Our goal is to get community members involved and to get to know each other. And we always say at Actors, we're not just a community theater that does theater. We're a community theater that builds community. Therefore, our goal is to get as many people involved as we possibly can. And so to be concerned about limiting and restricting what we can do in the future kind of says there is a maximum amount of value that theater can have to this community, and that the kind of bonds and friendships that you build during a show we can limit that, and we should limit that. And so it's not so much a number, but it's the concept of, we're here for the community. That's what we do. And I don't think the city of Ames wants to limit what it is that a community organization that's been around for 63 years, what we do for the community.
And I have one more question about lighting. So you mentioned that, sometimes you go over 10:30 p.m. Just so we have a better idea, what is the maximum you've stayed? What's the latest?
The longest show that I know of has run 3 hours. We start at 7:30. So by the time the audience goes home, because we wouldn't turn it off until the audience is left, right? It could be 11:15.
Okay.
If they really loved the cast, they'll stick around and visit because we meet the audience afterwards. It's big musicals, big cast.
When the city asked previously, typically we're walking out of there at 10:30, but there have been times, but that's not the norm.
Okay.
May I?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, forgive me for not being knowledgeable in your facility. I've only been in the town for about 6 years. I was aware that you existed. How many of your performances are matinees? Do you utilize matinees to limit your evening?
We do utilize matinees to the extent that we can put people in seats. What we typically have for each performance is that there is a matinee. So for each play that we put on, whether it's a 6 performance or the big musicals, we typically do 8 performances. One of those is a matinee. When we used to do 3 weekends and matinees every Sunday, we were having less than half houses. So we were seeing the attendance really down. And so what we've done, it's a supply and demand thing. For the folks that want to come at a matinee, we have matinees. If we were selling out matinees and having people say, don't you have another? We would schedule another matinee. We're not seeing that right now.
Okay.
It is.
Go ahead, sir.
It is the poorest selling performance typically for most shows. It is the last show, so anybody who didn't get into the others go to the matinee, but that show really sells out at the very, very,
All right.
very, very end.
Okay, and the board will learn I always have 3 questions whenever I have one. Okay, now currently you have a sold out show. By the time you open the door to the time the bell rings, are people still standing outside currently?
Are people standing
Yeah,
outside?
standing outside trying to get in the door.
No.
So there is room currently to get inside?
We changed our ticketing policy
Okay,
to where it's online ticketing now. Before, there were people lined up out the door because they had to do the business when you got inside.
okay.
And so, but with online ticketing, most folks have tickets in hand and they come right in. But the gathering room, we refer to it as our boardroom, that is the room that we're looking at expanding on the main floor, is not capable of holding even half the folks that are seated in the house.
And for instance, during intermission, people wanting to get out of the house through the boardroom to the restrooms, that room is packed.
Okay.
It is. I mean,
No way for grandma to get her walker.
no, that is exactly right.
In fact,
Okay.
grandma doesn't even come into the boardroom because it's too crowded.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I have a question for staff. When you were referring to the lighting and how you weren't, is it the upward lights that you're saying you want restricted, or is it the downward facing lights? You got your parking lot lights that tend to face downward. I would think a light onto a marquee would maybe face upward.
Right. Let me put the elevation image on the screen to refer to that. So this is the proposed building elevation. Currently, well, they're looking at putting these 4 down lights in that area that would wash the wall and that would also light the temporary banner sign when it's there. The strip lighting that's on the marquee and that goes across the front of the building as accent lighting is unusual for a building in a residential zone. So it's particularly that lighting that was that we felt was unusual, and the idea that it would turn off when there were not evening performances seemed very appropriate. And knowing, as was stated previously, that they were only about 40 evenings a year, made staff feel comfortable with the fact that that it could be there and not particularly intrusive to the residential area. But as I did state before, the lumens for that are low, and it does meet the outdoor code, but the outdoor code is particularly more oriented toward downlighting and night sky. And this does project outward, but at a very low amount of light.
Okay, now would staff be comfortable with the condition that the lighting is allowed for any performance, provided that there isn't any complaints from the adjacent or neighbors? And then giving the staff the ability then to reduce or limit the time that it's on?
I think whatever number is determined would be appropriate. If it's the number of performances and evening events, it could be tied to the lighting as well, as in that number could be an expansion from what it is now, with given some flexibility, but not with the idea that it's totally open-ended without any understanding of the
Okay, then
expectation.
staff is basically only concerned about the lights on the building,
Correct.
not the lights in the parking
Right.
lot.
No, the lights in the parking lot do meet our requirements.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I went over
No.
my three.
Actually, the lights that are atypical for a residential neighborhood, the colored lights, 10:30 can easily be off. They are non-essential for safety. We've already got the folks trapped in the building. And when they go home, when they're leaving to go to their cars, we have other lighting that will make the safety. So that's not a concern of ours.
So difference.
I see it adding.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. The number of performances, we don't want to keep it to just the 40 now, but it's not going to be, I said 180, it's not going to be that. There's only so many weekends in a year, and we're not going to perform in all of those. So it takes us 7 weeks to get a play put together and ready to put on, and then we put it on for 2 or 3 weekends. So doing the math, if it were 90 or 100, that's a number we'll probably never have that on in excess of those number of nights. And I don't think that's too restrictive.
And the other thing we just want to make sure you all understand is that we play host to other organizations and to smaller and other theater groups. And what we want to make sure is that we make sure that that's available to the arts community in the city of Ames. It's more than just us that benefits from the addition to the building. So it's anybody else who, and on a regular basis, we have people coming in and using it and can use it at night.
Mm-hmm.
I just had something to add in terms of the lighting. I'm Nick Holstrom. I represent RMH Architects, 1615 Golden Aspen Drive,
Do you-
Suite 110.
Okay. Do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Just to kind of put it into a scale or a reference, there is the lighting exception of 1800 lumens. Anything that exceeds that has to be properly shielded to the night sky ordinance. And that is based on a fixture. So with the LED strip lights, there's like a neon strip. It's a very low output. One strip at 46 feet has a lumen output of in terms of the blue light is 4.57 lumens a foot. So really for a 46-foot strip, it's 210 lumens. And I went through and I calculated everything, added everything up for all of the blue lights in there. In terms of a lumen output total, which wouldn't be analyzed this way, we're looking at 1,265 lumens. So the combined total of all that is below the 1,800 of all those lights. And then the red lights, which are going to be on the center marquee, the accent light number 2, when you total all those up, we're looking at 1,195 lumen output. So really, it's a very low, it's more of a glow, not a glare. But I just want.
Thank you.
The lighting for the parking lot to the west, is that street lights that illuminate that parking lot, or?
Those are new to this project, and those are specifically designed and shielded to keep all the light within the site and not trespass more than the 0.4
The
foot candles.
entrance parking lot, not
Yeah,
the,
yeah,
not
Oh,
the new
Those are
down.
the lights to the south.
Yeah,
To the west is the city.
Oh,
the
yeah,
lights
sorry,
to the
city
west,
lights,
yep.
and that lights it up enough.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So does the total 5 shows a year you talked about, that does not include community events?
Right.
Okay.
And actually, this is an arts organization, so we have people who like to be creative. We're doing an in-between now. Last year, it was 2 performances, 1 show, 2 performances. This year, it's a Christmas show, and I think it's 1 or 2 performances. Little things like that, but they're not appreciably large. It's small performances. The capacity of the theater for doing the rehearsals and moving the people in and out, building sets, things like that, we can't support much more than about 5 full-fledged shows a year. So whether it's a 8 or 9 performance or a 6 performance, that varies sometimes. But as far as the total number of plays we put on in a year, it's five big plays, and that's about the extent of what we can do.
Okay. Do you have an estimate of, or no, the evening performances or evening use of the space by other organizations that is typical?
In the last couple of years, I would say, Stan, you probably have a better sense.
Yeah. In the last couple of years, the Amos was, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. Arts Council was this last year for 1. I'm trying to remember what else we've done in the evening in that building. It's not a lot because right now the space is so small, we can't accommodate much. And we would like to be better hosts. It's just right now,
Yeah.
bedrooms are all full, if you know what I mean. The space is full.
Would you,
It's a handful.
handful?
Yeah, it's not like
Yeah.
20 or 30.
Yeah.
So
3, 4, probably a year, dependably. I mean, it's not a lot.
okay.
And
Thank
then
you.
outside of plays, we have anywhere from 2 or 3 to 5 or 6 other events that we do ourselves. We're trying to get the supporters of actors as involved as possible. So we generate different events for whether it's announcing our new season or it's a party appreciating the donors or things like that. We do occasional things, but once again, those are a handful.
So total other events that aren't shows would be about 10, including
Yeah.
these events and community?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. If that is it for the applicant, now any members of the public wishing to speak may do so. Oh, hello.
Greetings.
Welcome. So are there any members of the public wishing to speak? Okay. Seeing no one moving to the microphone, I'll close the public hearing. Now it is time for the board to ask any other questions and for staff and the applicant to present concluding summaries or any other information.
I don't have any other information to add. Staff is comfortable with a number that exceeds 40, but something less than probably 90. And we would support, as I mentioned before, not having an overstory tree in the front yard landscaping, even if it was understory tree or just additional shrubs in that space.
I have a
I
question.
had one more.
Oh, yeah, okay. Would staff support something more general, as in limit it to 5 shows with related rehearsals and activities? So instead of having like a number of evening events, it'd be 5 evening total shows. So it'd be like, that wouldn't include like the exact number of performances, but it'd be a little vague. So I can see how that would get us in trouble, so never mind.
Yeah.
Now that I'm describing it.
All related to one show.
Yep.
I struggle a little bit. I see what you're trying to do, but I'm struggling a little bit. Obviously, it's intuitive to me that if they were trying to expand from 136 to 150,
Yeah.
that's clearly an intensification in what they're trying to do. 6 shows, 5 shows, 4 shows, 7 shows, that's a yearly variance. 40 nights, 50 nights, 60 nights, 100 nights, that's starting to probably get outside the variance, but I don't know where you put that at for sure. So I have trouble putting a number of nights on being an intensification based on what they're doing with the changes in the parking lot and the changes to the entry of the building. That to me is not something that's changing anything that's intensifying or allowing them to intensify their use. If they were increasing the number of parking spaces, if they were making it so more people could standing room even to watch the show, that'd be different. But just the throughput to get people even into the show faster, I just don't see this as an intensification, no matter how you cut it. So I'm struggling with how you see this as an intensification.
I see it just on the lighting itself.
The lighting, maybe, but
That's really the only,
I think we're getting into discussion.
oh, okay.
Sorry.
okay.
So we should probably have a motion before we have discussion, but I want to let the applicant present any other information if they have any. Or any other questions? Do you have any questions?
I've been listening.
Okay, great.
I got one for staff.
Yeah,
I see on the landscape plan that they're putting in concrete planters. in
Yes.
What is the front of the building?
Yes.
Doesn't that qualify as landscaping in the front?
The front yard landscaping generally in the code is intended to be between the parking lot and the street or between the building and the street when there is no parking lot. So in this case, it would not count toward front yard landscaping. It is a nice feature that they've added that's not required, but they're trying to make it look nice and we appreciate that. But it wouldn't totally qualify as front yard landscaping.
Okay, so then if they put a bush just inside the property lines, outside the parking, that would get that qualification? Like a nice little boxwood or, or something right there in that corner?
They don't have any space between their property line and the parking that would, well, typically a front yard landscaping is required to be a 10-foot depth.
Then this
A
isn't
10-foot
this isn't
width.
to scale then?
So that little space between the stripe and the property line would not suffice.
Is there a percentage?
Well, like I said,
Code.
typically your front yard landscaping has a minimum width of 10 feet, which helps to allow the shrubbery or tree or whatever's in there to then be sustainable. And then the other thing that I did not mention, but landscape planters, even though they could be reviewed as an aesthetic thing or environmental thing, they also do function and traffic control and traffic in that they help with the loading onto the site. So right now there's a parking space right there, which actually juts into a little bit of the entryway drive that's there now. By putting an island or a parking planter in there, it actually improves the maneuverability of the site because there's space, more space for loading and for coming in and backing up and so forth. That's just a functional reality of the planter that is part of what's being requested.
Okay. Before we have a motion, should we just recap some of the new evidence presented during the testimony? Great. So I heard, let me know, guys, that there are at least 10 other events besides performances. So that would bring up the total number to 50 and maybe more performances than even 40.
Okay.
So 60 was what everybody,
Sure.
60? Staff's comfortable with 90. I want to make sure it's typical and we're not allowing an intensification.
Yes.
Okay.
So you're saying how many?
I haven't made a motion yet. I'm just
Oh,
trying
okay.
to restate how many I believe was stated by the applicant that is typical.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Does anyone have a motion? And I do believe that we will need to go through the findings again. And if there are changes to the conditions, go through the findings and change the numbers in the findings. So maybe Eloise can help us with that if there is an amendment to the conditions. Do I hear a motion from anyone?
I can, unless you want him to go.
It'd be my first one.
All right. So, you want to go or you want me to do it?
Go right ahead.
All right. I'll move that the zoning board of adjustment approves this request for a special use permit to allow enlargement of a non-conforming commercial use in a residential zone at 120 Abraham Drive with the following conditions. The building and accent lighting will be illuminated no more than 80 nights a year, and lighting will be turned off by 11 p.m. And then keep the notes there. Strike B, don't put a limit on the number of performances and events in the evening. And then C, create a front yard landscape plan on the south side of the entrance and plant 1 overstory tree, 7 low shrubs to comply at least in part with the front yard landscaping requirement.
80.
Friendly amendment?
Sure.
We got to get a second first.
Do we take a second before an amendment? I think we do the amendment, then we vote on the amendment, then we vote on the motion.
We got to get a second. Got to prove that it's worth something first.
What did you say about the overstory tree?
I didn't say anything about it. Just kept it as it is in C. I kept C.
Well, I'll
strike B.
second it.
Okay. Then-
There we can, and then ask for a friendly amendment.
Sure.
Staff stated that an overstory tree would not be conducive in that parking lot because of the overhead and the water line.
Mhm.
Maybe striking the overstory and leaving it with shrubs.
All right.
Second.
Okay, we have a second out of, please tell me how to pronounce your last name.
Al-Kathiri.
Al-Kathiri, thank you. Replacing with shrubs. Could you write that down so we have it for our recording secretary, please?
If I had a writing
Oh,
pencil, I
thank
could text
you.
it. I could text
I
it
think
to
that's
you.
always helpful.
You have scratch paper?
I just have been writing in the back some things. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
recorded.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. And then
She's got it.
could I offer an amendment to match the 80 nights permitted and with your first condition with the number of evening performances and events with 80?
You'd like to reintroduce B
I'd like to reintroduce B, but increase it
and match it to the 80?
to match it to your suggested 80.
Sure.
Is that a second or an okay?
That's a second. Sure.
Okay. And then I think we need to, sorry, Jackie, go through the findings and make some amendments then.
Shall I start?
Yes, please. I'm trying to get to the first one myself.
Page 8, under general standards. 1, it can be concluded the property meets the general standard for a special use permit based on the findings of fact listed there.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2,
136.
given that that there would be a limitation on the operation of the site and the use of the structure to no more than 80 nights a year, it can be concluded that given the existing conditions, scale, and appearance of the building and existing level of activity, including up to 80 nights a year for both the lighting and the events and use of the space, the proposed expansion can be found to be compatible with its surroundings and concluded that it meets general standard 2 for a special use permit. Number 3, not be hazardous or disturbing to the existing or future uses in the same general vicinity, that the intensity of use would not be substantially changed from what it is today, but would then allow flexibility in the use, given the opportunities for things to come and change over time, that it could be concluded that the property meets general standard number 3 for special use permit. Number 4, be served
Quick
adequate.
Quick question on number 3.
Yes.
Do we need to clarify in that's, and I just ask for both the motion and the findings of fact. We're talking about the building lights here, not the parking lot lights. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Number 4, dealing with the public facilities, that it is concluded that the property meets the general standard number 4 for a special use permit. Number 5, not create excessive additional requirements for public cost. It can be concluded that it meets general standard number 5 for a special use permit. Number 6, not involve uses, activities, processes, materials, equipment, conditions of operation that will be detrimental to any person, property, or general welfare by reason or excessive production of traffic, noise, smoke, fumes, glare, or odors. Findings of fact that the operations will carry on as they have in the past with some flexibility to have expansion up to 80 nights a year, which we do not believe would change the intensity in use beyond what it is currently. And that the lighting would also comply with that and not be disruptive to the residential area with the limitations as proposed. and therefore it can be concluded the property meets general standard number 6 for a special use permit. That number 7, be consistent with the intent, purpose of the zone, that the existing and proposed commercial use of the building is proposed to continue as non-conforming use in the residential high-density zoning district. And on this basis, it can be concluded that the property meets the general standard number 7 for special use permit. Under residential zone standards, not create excessively higher levels of traffic than the predominant pattern in the area, and not create additional traffic from the proposed use that would change the street classification. That the capacity of the use is not changing, but flexibility is being added. Therefore, it can be concluded that the development meets residential zone standard 1 for a special use permit. Number 2, not create a noticeably different travel pattern. The findings of fact show that the site's been there and travel has been in place to the site for over 40 years. And it can enter the site from either Abraham Drive or Todd Drive. Therefore, it can be concluded that the use meets the proposed expansion and use meets the residential zone standard 2 for a special use permit. Number 3, not generate truck trips. And there's no trucks of that weight except perhaps the waste collection vehicle or during construction, the construction site vehicles. So therefore, it can be concluded that it meets the residential zone standard number 3 for a special use permit. Number 4, not have noticeably different and disruptive hours of operation, given that the lights will be off by 11 p.m. and that the lights would only be illuminated no more than 80 nights per year for those purposes, such as evening shows, dress rehearsals, season announce evening, and donor appreciation evenings. That it can be concluded that they will continue as they have in the past with slight flexibility, and therefore it can be concluded that the proposed use meets residential standard number 4 for special use permit. Number 5, be sufficiently desirable for the entire community that the loss of residential land is justifiable in relation to the benefit. And the fact is, it's been there for over 40 years. There would be no loss of residential land at this point beyond what it has been for over 40 years. Therefore, it does meet residential zone standard 5 for a special use permit. Be compatible in terms of structure, placement, height, orientation, or scale with the predominant building pattern in the area. And it does meet the findings of fact still stand as what's stated there. And it can be concluded that the development meets residential zone standard 6 for special use permit. Number 7, I don't have in front of me. Oh, no, number 7 was exempt because it's non-conforming. And it can't meet that standard as non-conforming use. Number 8, be consistent with all other applicable standards in the zone. As stated in the findings of fact, those still stand. And it can be concluded then.
I think we have a change to that one too, though, with the
Pardon?
the conclusions, the overstory tree changed.
Oh, yes. Yes, in the conclusion.
Okay,
Right. Thank you for
thank you.
bringing that to my attention.
Yeah, you just scratched the oversized tree.
And you motioned for an,
Pardon?
you just motioned to remove it, correct?
Yeah.
Great.
It was
Right, so-
basically scratched the tree.
Okay, thank you.
Because
So
of the
in
overhead.
conclusion, the addition of 7 low shrubs would help to comply, at least in part, with the front yard landscaping requirement. And with the condition of 7 low shrubs, it can be concluded that development meets the residential zone standard 8 for a special use permit.
Thank you so much.
Glad she did that.
I know. Should we take separate motions on each amendment to the original, or is one vote okay? Should we take separate votes on each motion?
As a
amendment.
friendly amendment, it was included in
Okay,
the original
great.
motion.
I'll call mine friendly too.
All right.
as I
So-
understood.
Okay.
Have friendly amendments, Jane?
Can we have friendly amendments?
I am not entirely sure procedurally how this works.
But what if
Okay.
what if I just restate my motion and get a second from there, including the
Why don't we
Discuss amendments.
withdraw the motions and
Make
start
one
over?
fresh
I'll
one?
withdraw my second.
You
and I'll withdraw my motion,
And I'll withdraw my second, and then we'll take a fresh motion
and
and
then I'll
a vote.
restate my motion
Thank you.
with.
My second,
Oh,
whatever it was.
yeah. Thank you.
All right. I will move that the zoning board of adjustment approves this request for a special use permit to allow enlargement of a non-conforming commercial use in a residential zone at 120 Abraham Drive with the following conditions. The building and accent lighting will be illuminated no more than 80 nights a year, and the lighting will be turned off by 11 p.m. Keep the note. B, evening after 6 p.m. performances and events shall be limited to 80 days in a calendar year. And C, create a front yard landscape planter on the south side of the entrance and plant 7 low shrubs to comply at least in part with the front yard landscaping requirement.
Great.
Before you get a second, I just want to ask a question.
Yes.
I just want to, should we add the word building lighting and the second lighting in there? You've got building lighting and then you've got lighting.
And accent lighting.
Where do we have lighting?
A, the building and accent lighting.
Building and accent lighting will
Will
be
be-
illuminated no more than 80 nights a year and
Mhm. I thought that's what you said.
That's what
I
we're
believe
turning
Well,
they
then it says, and lighting will be turned
and
off.
And building and accent lighting will be.
Okay.
The
Oh, I see
accent
what you're
lighting
saying.
is
Yeah.
on the
Okay.
building.
I
Yes.
just
Because I
Be
do
clear,
agree that
okay. Fair enough.
I do very much agree that the parking
Oh,
lot
yeah.
lighting
Oh, yes.
I don't
should not
think
be
that's-
turned off
that's
when people are
clarified.
still.
I guess that I felt it was implied that lighting meant that.
We'll
building
just
and
cover our
accent lighting.
bases.
But I'll
As I
say
said,
building
5
and
years
accent
from now, I
lighting.
don't want somebody to misunderstand.
Okay,
Okay.
so is my motion clear then?
Yes.
Yes, to me it is.
Now, parking lot lighting should be on just for public safety
Yeah.
all night. That way the cops can see if there's somebody back there.
Okay. And so do we have a second?
Second,
So that is a motion by Perkins, second by Bowers. Roll call vote.
Aye.
Aye.
I have to say something before I vote. I'm sorry, I forgot before. I have an acquaintance with the applicant, Nick Hallstrom, and our relationship does not make me, I'm impartial in this vote, and we've not discussed this conditional use permit or special use permit at all. So with that, I will vote aye.
aye.
Okay. So the motion is approved. Anyone wishing to appeal this decision may do so to a court of record within 30 days after the filing of the decision. Okay, next on the agenda is,
Thank you all.
thank you.
Thank you.
You're all invited to come see us.
When do the tickets go on sale?
They are. Check our website.
Because we're selling out quick.
Next year.
I lost my agenda.
Strawberries.
Found it.
We're putting on.
Okay. So the next item on the agenda is a request for a special use permit to allow the construction of a garden and garden pavilion at Northridge Village, a senior living facility in the FS-RM Suburban Residential Floating Zone Residential Medium Density Zoning District. Eloise.
Thank you. So this image before you is the location map of the subject property. The property is located between George W. Carver Avenue and Stang Drive. And it has been developed in 2 phases thus far. A senior living facility on the left, and then a independent living facility on the right. Where the arrow is pointing, where it says subject property, there is a piece of vacant land that's adjacent to that cul-de-sac area. There is a drive that extends and sidewalks that extend between the 2 buildings that is not real self-evident in this aerial. And the existing zoning of the site is FSRM. The request is to construct a garden and garden pavilion on approximately a half an acre of vacant ground within the Northridge Village campus. The site is 12.35 acres and has received special use permits in the past for the construction that's taken place thus far. The owners have indicated that a desire to build a future third building, but that part has not come before you yet. That will be in the future. A special use permit, as I said, was required for each of the previous approvals. This request for the pavilion. The pavilion is a 600 square foot garden pavilion, and it must be approved as well by a special use permit. One of the suburban residential development principles is the provision of common open space in residential areas. And we believe that the garden would fit within the idea of open space, very much so. And the proposed garden will provide both food and therapy for the village residents. It will be supervised by the dietary manager, maintenance staff, and employees in cooperation with the ISU Extension Service. And so we see it as an appropriate common open space use for this community. The FSRM zoning district includes landscaping and buffering requirements between dissimilar uses, and specifically a 10-foot landscaping strip is typically required and was installed for both phase 1 and phase 2. It's probably not showing on these plans, but I can point out. For phase 1, that landscaping buffer was installed along here. And for this phase of building, it was installed here. And then there was a strip of landscaping installed along this edge of the pavement here as to meet their L3 landscaping requirements at that time. With the board's acceptance of this existing condition, the proposed garden and pavilion would not trigger any additional landscaping or parking, and sidewalks are required to connect the pavilion to the existing sidewalk system. So if we go to this page, it's page C31, you can see that there's sidewalks that envelop the pavilion, and that the pavilion has a sidewalk that would connect into this network of sidewalk that goes between the two buildings. There's also a sidewalk that goes around the cul-de-sac, which is connected to the site as well over in this area. Utilities currently serve the facility, of course, and will be extended to service the pavilion. Particularly, they will have electric at that location. Water will be to serve the water hydrants. Notification was made to property owners within 200 feet and a sign was placed. And then to go through the criteria and the findings of fact. Should be a little shorter. It's not, it is conforming. Number 1, general standards be harmonious with and in accordance with the general principles of the land use policy. The request is for a half-acre garden and 600 square foot garden pavilion on the existing campus of Northridge Village, which is a continuum of care senior housing facility. The pavilion is proposed just west over here of this existing cul-de-sac. Between the original community and the independent living building, the garden pavilion will have connecting infrastructure for water, sewer, and electric utilities. The proposed garden and garden pavilion will meet goal 4 of the land use policy plan to create a greater sense of place and connectivity physically and psychologically in building a neighborhood and overall community identity and spirit. The garden will promote community identity by providing both food and therapy for Northridge Village residents. The use of the currently vacant site for a garden is an appropriate common open space use for the Northridge Village community. In concluding, the existing senior living facility helps to fulfill the land use policy plan policy for providing adequate housing for a variety of needs at a medium density range that's consistent with the expectation of the land use policy plan. And the proposed garden and garden pavilion is consistent with the goals of the land use policy plan in creating a community amenity and space to promote community identity. Therefore, it can be concluded that the development meets general standard 1 for a special use permit. 2, be designed, constructed, operated, and maintained so as to be harmonious and appropriate in appearance with the existing and intended character of the general vicinity, and that such a use will not change the essential character of the area in which it is proposed. The findings of fact: the pavilion will be consistent in materials and will have similar design features as the existing building. This can be seen in that elevation. I showed here at the first that this feature here is intended to replicate building number 1 at the entrance to that building. It will have the existing buildings include design features that replicate the residential character of the area, included pitched roofs and changing facade treatments of lap siding, stone, and shingle siding. In conclusion, the proposed design of the pavilion fits well within the Northridge Village campus, both in scale and appearance, and will also be compatible with the residential context of the surrounding area. It can be concluded that the development meets general standard 2 for a special use permit. Number 3, not be hazardous or disturbing to existing or future uses in the same general vicinity. Findings of fact: the proposed garden and pavilion will be located on approximately ½ acre of vacant ground within the existing Northridge Village campus. The primary existing use in the general vicinity is detached residences, generally owner occupied. The use to the north is a church. Existing residents at Northridge Village within the independent senior living facility are 55 years older or older. Conclusion: construction of the garden and pavilion as proposed should not be disturbing or hazardous to existing and future uses in the area, as it is an allowed use to a group living. It can be concluded that the development meets general standard 3 for a special use permit. Number 4, be served adequately by essential public facilities and services such as highway, streets, police, fire protection, drainage structures, refuse disposal, water and sewage facilities, and or schools. Findings of fact: the project is located on the Northridge Village campus and will be accessed by Northridge Village entrances on George W. Carver Avenue and Stang Road. All city services already exist on site. Extension of these services will connect to the garden pavilion. Unrecorded easements will need to be granted to the city and recorded. Staff will recommend a condition of approval that these easements be prior to the city's issuance of any future certificates of occupancy. And on that note, there is no certificate of occupancy required for a garden pavilion, but understanding that they're looking to do a phase 3 building, that's what that is referring to. This property is adequately served by essential public facilities and services and by an existing stormwater pond. Therefore, it can be concluded that the development meets general standard 4 for a special use permit. Number 5, not create additional requirements at public cost for public facilities or services. Findings of fact: the project will be solely funded and maintained by Northridge Village. Conclusion: no extension of public facilities will be required. It can be concluded that the development meets general standard 5 for special use permit. Not involve uses, activities, processes, materials, and equipment or conditions of operation that will be detrimental to any person, property, or general welfare by reason of excessive production of traffic noise, smoke, fumes, glare, or odors. Findings of fact: the project is for a garden to provide both food and therapy for Northridge Village residents. It will be supervised by the Northridge Village dietary manager, maintenance staff, and employees in cooperation with the ISU Extension Office. The garden and pavilion will not produce excessive production of traffic noise, smoke, fumes, glare, or odors. Conclusion, the addition of this accessory use will not introduce any nuisance factors into the neighborhood. It can be concluded that the development meets general standard 6 for a special use permit. Number 7, be consistent with the intent and purpose of the zone in which it is proposed to locate such use. The project is located on the Northridge Village campus and is designed to benefit its residents physically and mentally. The original master plan for Northridge Village was approved by the City Council on November 26, 2013. The property is zoned FSRM. The proposed garden and garden pavilion can be considered an accessory use to the existing continuum of care senior living facility. Conclusion, the use of a portion of the campus for the proposed accessory use is consistent with the intent and purpose of the suburban residential zoning district. It can be concluded that the development meets general standard 7 for special use permit. Residential zone standards, not create excessively higher levels of traffic than the predominant pattern in the area and not create additional traffic from the proposed use that would change the street classification, and such traffic shall not lower the level of service at area intersections. Findings of fact, the project is located in Northridge Village campus and will be accessed by Northridge Village entrances already existing on George W. Carver Avenue and Stang Road. Conclusion, the approval of a garden and pavilion within the campus will not create additional traffic on the adjacent street network. The street classification and level of service for adjacent streets will not be impacted. It can be concluded that the development meets residential zone standard 1 for special use permit. Number 2, not create a noticeably different travel pattern than the predominant pattern in the area. And as stated, there's no additional traffic, there's no additional parking required for this particular use. And it can be concluded that the development meets residential zone standard 2 for special use permit. Not generate truck trips over 26,000 gross vehicle weight. It will not be receiving any large vehicle traffic, and the traffic that does come in to the site will use the existing entrances and drives. It can be concluded that the development meets residential zone standard 3 for special use permit. Not have noticeably different disruptive hours of operation. The project's a residential garden and will see activity during daylight hours, and it can be concluded that the development meets residential zone standard 4 for special use permit. Be sufficiently desirable for the entire community that the loss of residential land is justifiable in relation to the benefit. The proposed garden and pavilion does not reduce the availability of housing within the site. The master plan set a residential cap that will not be undermined by the approval of this project. Use of some of the open space as a garden is appropriate. And it can be concluded that the development meets residential zone standard 5 for a special use permit. Be compatible in terms of structure, placement, height, orientation, or scale with the predominant building pattern of the area. The garden pavilion will be consistent in materials and similar in design, as already stated and shown with the elevations. And the form and the detailing of the garden pavilion fits the residential character of the area. Concluding that the placement, height, scale, massing, and facade treatment of the proposed pavilion building makes the building compatible with residential surroundings, and it can be concluded that the development meets residential zone standard 6 for a special use permit. Be located on the lot with a greater setback or with landscape buffering to minimize the impact of the use on adjacent property. The pavilion meets the 25-foot front yard setback from Sheffield Avenue, which is the cul-de-sac, and it's located more than 130 feet from the south property line, abutting the residential low-density homes. An inner and outer row of overstory trees encircle the cul-de-sac, and an L3 landscape buffer was installed along the drive aisle with the construction of the Phase 2 building. The disruption of that existing landscape is expected to happen with the construction of this building. However, it will be replaced and put back, and the trees will be located around the pavilion and so slightly moved from the existing location, which is actually over a water line. The vacant area between the garden and pavilion and south property line is proposed as a half-acre garden area. And gardens are a form of open space, and as such, it can be determined that no additional landscape buffer is required along the south property line, given the size of the garden and the distance between the pavilion and the south property line, which is 130 feet or more. Therefore, it can be concluded that the development meets residential zone standard 7 for special use permit. And number 8, be consistent with all other applicable standards in the zone. The Ames Development Review Committee, which we call DRC, has reviewed the proposed site plan and determined it to be in compliance with applicable general development standards, the standards of FSRM zoning district and other city standards. Therefore, it can be concluded that the development meets residential zone standard 8 for special use permit. The alternatives, the zoning board of adjustment can approve this request to allow the construction of a half-acre garden and 600 square foot pavilion with utilities within the Northridge Village continuum of care campus in the FSRM zoning district at 3305 Stang Road, and the following condition that all easements for public utilities on site will be provided prior to the city issuance of any further certificates of occupancy. Number 2, you can approve it with conditions either in addition to or in lieu of the one noted above. Or number 3, you can deny this request by finding that the project does not meet the criteria of section 2915.03.4. Or number 4, you can refer this back to the applicant or to city staff for additional information. We recommend as staff that the proposed half-acre, that says 5-acre garden, it should be 0.5 acre garden, half-acre garden, and 600 square foot pavilion with utilities within the Northridge continuum of care campus is consistent with the general and specific residential standards and criteria required for granting a special use permit. Furthermore, it meets the zone specific and general requirements of the zoning ordinance. Therefore, based upon the findings of fact and conclusions above, it is the recommendation, finally, of the Department of Planning and Housing that the Zoning Board of Adjustment act in accordance with alternative number 1.
Thank you. Any questions for the staff board?
That one was easy.
Yeah. Okay. Hearing none, the applicant may speak to their request if they'd like to. Yeah.
Hi, Nicole Neal with Civil Design Advantage. The address is 3401 Southeast Crossroad Drives in Grimes.
Do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you, Eloise. I appreciate it. I know it's been a long night, so I'll be very short. So basically, we just want to state that we are in support of all staff comments, and I know easements are currently being worked on. So I'm here to answer any questions, shall you have any. We also have Karen here from Scenic Development who would love to touch a little bit more on the garden and just kind of the reasoning behind it and everything for you.
Excellent. Any questions before? Okay. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karen Laybourne with Scenic Development, and my address is 11827 West 112th Street, Suite 103, Overland Park, Kansas, 66210.
And do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
And thank you, Eloise, sorry. It has been a long night. I feel for you guys. We are really excited to be able to do, this is our first garden project for one of our senior living communities, and it's been really exciting to do this here in Ames. We've had great support from ISU, and it's wonderful to work with. The Extension Office and the students that we've been in contact with already are just phenomenal. It's been great. The facility, everyone there is very excited about the garden. The residents are already kind of buzzing about it. The executive director is really excited. Dietary She had quite a few suggestions for produce, for what she wants planted, and activities too is also on board. So everybody's really looking forward to it. Our main goal is fresh produce for the residents, plus all the extra, the therapy that they'll get, emotional, spiritual, physical. We probably won't see the residents out there actually working it a lot, but they're really going to enjoy it. They'll be able to sit. That's mainly the use for the pavilion, is a nice shady spot they can sit and kind of watch and enjoy the garden. Again, ISU involvement is wonderful. Our goal is we're starting small this summer, but the goal is to have ISU just kind of take it and run with it. And it could change from year to year depending on the students in the program. It could be dietary, it could be future farmers, it could be business enterprises, marketing, however ISU wants to use it, we're all behind that. So it's a great partnership.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Any questions?
Could we take a 5-minute recess so I could speak with council?
Oh.
Do we need a motion or?
I don't think so. Recess. Mm-hmm. Oh, 7:52. Thank you. Okay. If there's no further questions or any for the
See the
applicant.
bottom corner?
Sure.
That-
Oh, sure.
It's out of my focal length.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, and actually, I did want to touch on that. We do want to echo and come here, that's our front entrance to Northridge Village. So we love the barn red left siding. The Clara store has a metal roof. We like that on the pavilion too. This is the feel and the flavor that we want.
Are these solid paths or
This is
flexible
good. Well,
paths?
this is mulch. This
Okay.
is for ISU. Courtney Long, the agent with the extension office, designed this for us. Some things are going to change. We're going to do potatoes, we're going to do zucchini, but the paths and all of that are going to, this is what the layout will be for this year. It's, like I said, it's small, but it's a great way to get our feet wet, kind of see how we're
Okay.
doing and all this. And then next year, ISU will expand it. And that'll give us a chance to see how the mulch paths work. Do we want to do that? Do we want to do, grass paths, whatever works best for the residents.
Okay.
Where exactly is that part with where you're growing?
I have a little better.
Sure.
I think it comes.
I think I called it so it also has that.
Okay, right out next to the, next to the cul-de-sac. Okay.
How do I
Because
know?
it's actually, if there is
I
a
just went like this area.
street, it's not
Yeah.
really a street, it's our parking,
Okay,
but there's a little road that runs right. through.
Okay.
Okay.
So if you
Yeah.
imagine the
Okay.
pavilion is
Kitchen,
proposed,
dietary can run right into the kitchen right there.
and then
The dumpsters are right, everything's just perfect for it right there.
okay. Thank you.
That's an old aerial photo.
It is, but at least it has the pavement.
Okay. If there's no other questions for the applicant, I'll open the public hearing. And any members of the public wishing to speak may do so. And seeing no one, we will close the public hearing. And if there's any other questions or statements from the applicant or staff, we can have those now.
I have nothing further to add.
I have nothing.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So we can entertain a motion if there are no further questions.
Move alternative number 1, zoning board of adjustment approve this request for a special use permit to allow the construction of a half-acre garden, and 600 square foot pavilion with utilities within the Northridge Village Continuum of Care Campus in the FSRM zoning district at 3305 Stang Road with the following condition. A, all easements for public utilities on site will be provided prior to the city issuance of any future certificates of occupancy.
Second.
Okay, so that's a motion by Bowers and a second by Perkins. For alternative one, approval with condition. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll have a roll call vote.
Aye.
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 Okay, and the motion is approved. Anyone wishing to appeal this decision to a court of record may do so within 30 days after the filing of this decision. Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Oh.
Well, I thought you were making the motion.
I'll make the motion to adjourn. All those in favor, say aye.
What about
Aye.
discussion?
Adjourned. Oh, you wanted to say?
You can't discuss the motion.
We just got to leave.